Professor Asha Kunwar received the International Council for Open and Distance Education Prize of Excellence in 2009. Please, Professor Asha.
It's a privilege to speak to such a distinguished audience, and excuse me if you can please settle down here. Dr. John Knight, Steve Keller and Samar Saad for the invitation, and to all the organizers who have taken so much trouble in putting this all together. But first, let me introduce you briefly to my organization, the Commonwealth of Learning, or CALL, since I'll be referring to it later. CALL is an intergovernmental organization established by the Commonwealth Heads of Government. We are based in Vancouver, Canada, and have a regional office for Asia in Delhi. The Commonwealth, all the yellow bits you can see are member states of the Commonwealth, is a diverse association of 53 countries that cover all regions of the globe, right from the Pacific to Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. So what does CALL do? CALL's mission is to help Commonwealth countries to harness the potential of distance education and technology to enhance access to quality learning that leads to development, and our motto is learning for development. In this presentation, I will address the theme of the conference, Innovations in Education for the 21st Century, from Policies to Practice. I will first look at the context of education today. I will then review the 4 key developments that have emerged as a response to the growing need for learning. In the last 5 decades, we have seen the emergence of innovations in the shape of distance education, online learning, open education resources or OER, and MOOCs, and the implications these have had for policy and practice in different parts of the world. So I'll be taking examples from different countries. In conclusion, I will raise questions relating to how these innovations can be harnessed to provide the relevant knowledge and skills to our learners, particularly the youth, to deal with the requirements of the 21st century. And I'm happy that some of the opening speakers, including the President, Dr. Knight, and Samar, have addressed some of those issues. But first, the context. There are more young people on the planet today than ever before. The population aged 15 to 24 exceeded 1.2 billion in 2010, which means that youth make up about 17% of the world's population. And this young population is growing fastest in the poorest nations of the world. In 2013, 75 million youth were unemployed, accounting for over 12% of global unemployment. Now you'll say that global unemployment is 50% among the young in some countries like Spain, but this is the global rate which takes into account China and India, where the percentage of unemployment is less than 10, and that's why this number is skewed and comes down to 12%. In Palestine, the general unemployment rate in Gaza increased from 40 to 44% in the first 2 quarters of this year, while it came down from 18 to 16% in the West Bank during the same period. However, unemployment among the 20 to 24-year-olds is at a staggering nearly 43%. This magnitude of youth unemployment has resulted in a greater demand for knowledge and skills. In the previous decade, we have seen an unprecedented demand for higher education. In 2007, there were 150 million tertiary students globally. We find that the number has increased to 165 million in 2012, with an estimate that this is expected to rise to 263 million by 2025. So what does it mean in real terms? If we are to accommodate the children who will reach enrollment age between now and 2025, we will need to build 4 new universities every single week with a capacity of 30,000 per institution. Now, is this a realistic option? As we can see, tertiary enrollment has more than doubled in Palestine in the last decade, and the demand is expected to grow. In fact, if you look at secondary and tertiary enrollment figures in Palestine, it compares very favorably with world averages. Yet in both cases, whether you look at the world, there is a transition of 73% of secondary to tertiary at only 32%, in Palestine from 83 to 49 only. In both cases, a high percentage of young people drop out of education after the secondary level. There could be several reasons for this, but one could well be the costs. As we know, the costs of higher education have risen exponentially. An article in The Economist asks whether higher education is still worth it. The costs have risen way above inflation rates in the past 3 decades, making higher education increasingly unaffordable, particularly in the United States. Now, this may be an American situation, but quality higher education is still beyond the reach of many in the developing world. And has this increased cost resulted in better quality higher education? A 2011 study found that 36% of college graduates in the US did not show any significant cognitive gains over 4 years of college. And the second interesting finding was that half the employers surveyed said they had trouble finding suitable graduates to hire. A McKinsey report points out, and I quote, that employers, education providers, and youth live in parallel universes, unquote, and very often these worlds do not meet. Over 50% of the youth surveyed did not believe that their secondary education would lead to employment. Similarly, about 50% of the employers did not think that the new graduates had the skills to be hired even at the entry level. There seems to be a disconnect between what we teach in our schools and universities and what is required by the job market. So can technology help? We have seen a phenomenal growth in different technologies in the past decade. In Palestine as well, there has been a gradual increase, if you look at the bottom 2 lines, in the number of households with access to the internet and telephone lines. But the real growth has been in mobile phones, touching nearly 100%, which is the top line. While there is a digital divide between the different regions of the world, mobile devices which are affordable and accessible are proving to be a game changer. As government and policymakers seek to expand the access to education, reduce costs, and improve standards, it is clear that alternative approaches are needed. In the current economic climate, traditional brick and mortar solutions will not be enough. Let us look at the 4 developments which emerged as a response to the growing demand for affordable quality education. The rising demand for higher education gave rise to several new types of providers, the distance education institution being one key development. The success of the Open University UK captured the imagination of policymakers around the world, but particularly in developing countries. In 1988, when the Commonwealth of Learning, or COL, began its operations, there were only 10 open universities in the Commonwealth. You can see the red dots, 3 in Canada, and only 1 in Africa, which was University of South Africa. Now, 25 years later, look at the number of dots where they have shifted. This is in 2012. There are 28 open universities as opposed to the 10. Only 1 remained in Canada. And the other growth happened in Asia. You can see India has 17 open universities, Africa has 5. So the next wave of open universities will happen in Africa. So why are open universities so popular? One reason is lower costs. A study by the National Knowledge Commission India shows that mega universities, which means universities with an enrollment of 100,000 students or more, which achieve economies of scale, cost substantially less than campus institutions. Pakistan's Allama Iqbal Open University costs 22%, China 40%, India's Indira Gandhi National Open University 35%, and the Open University UK 50%, and that's slightly more because of more intensive use of technologies as compared to campus universities. So what of quality? In 2012, the Open University of the UK ranked first in student satisfaction among all universities of the country. In addition, the Open University ranked 5th among the 100 universities surveyed by the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK and was one rank higher than Oxford University. So quality can be achieved through distance education. Now let's look at some policy and practice. India has developed a national policy for distance learning, and I've given you the link for that. Established 17 open universities which cater to 23% of all enrollments in higher education, which is about 3.8 million students. So here is an example of a developing country using an alternative approach to provide access to education to millions of its young people. When the Open University UK was established in 1969, the notion of openness was a significant innovation. Lord Crowther, the founding chancellor of the Open University of the UK's statement of openness in relation to people, places, methods, and ideas forms the basis of throwing open the ivory towers of higher education. Open universities were oriented towards the massification of higher education. Many open universities do not insist on entry qualifications, allow learners to accumulate credits at their own pace and convenience, and are flexible enough to allow learners to choose the courses they wish to study towards their qualifications. The new ideology was, and the pedagogic innovation was, that learning could take place without a teacher, and self-instructional materials were developed to cater to the diverse needs of the learners. There was a greater use of radio and television to supplement print materials, and the learner was now seen as a consumer who actually had the ability to exercise choices. With more access to technologies, there is an increasing trend towards online learning, especially in the developed world. In 2012, over 33% of all US higher education students were taking at least one online course. In fact, in 2013, you can see that almost all public institutions in the US offer online courses, and that's the figure to the right. It's not looking orange, but the darkest one to the right. So in terms of policy and practice, online courses have to be accredited by one of the 6 regional accreditation agencies and are seen as especially critical to the survival of the larger institutions offering master's and doctoral programs. After North America, Asia has the largest growth rate in online learning, with developing countries like Myanmar, Thailand, and Malaysia leading the continent in e-learning. The Open University of Malaysia has over 90,000 online students, while Mumbai University enrolls nearly 80,000 online learners. There is a significant number of online learners in the industry-based IT courses, which are then recognized towards employment. So the private providers are increasingly entering the market. The first large-scale online course appeared in 1989, almost 20 years after the first distance education course started. This also happened at the Open University UK, and it was the same year when the intranet was introduced to the world. Online courses brought in innovations such as authoring tools, learning management systems, unlimited web resources, and online self-tests, which introduced a greater scope for interactivity. Let us look at the third trend. With the rise of social media, there has been a global movement towards collaboration in the development and sharing of content, and we have seen the rise of open education resources, or OER. The fundamental principle is that any materials developed with public funds should be made available free to others. Now, OER are educational materials that are free and freely available. OER can be reused and repurposed to suit different needs without seeking the permission of the author, and could be available in any medium: print, audio, video, digital. One key difference between OER and other educational resources is that OER have an open license which allows you to adapt and reuse without having to request the copyright holder. Many countries and institutions around the world have developed OER policies, and I've mentioned some of them. 69 policy statements are available when I was looking last week in 22 countries. You will also note that several developing countries such as India, Brazil, and Ghana are actively developing and adapting open education resources. After the US, which has been a leader in OER with MIT, Rice University, and so on, China is a world leader with over 11,000 OER courses, but most of them are available in Mandarin. So what are the benefits of OER? As we know, textbooks are often a costly proposition, especially in disciplines such as engineering and so on. In the US, under the Utah Open Textbooks Project, an OER-based textbook can cost just $5, and if it's accessed online, it can be entirely free. Likewise, in a developing country, the government of South Africa has opted for OER textbooks, and they will be developing these every year and saving millions of rand that they were paying to publishers. So now let's come to the pedagogic part. Can OER influence learning outcomes? Professor Bob Bernard of the Educational Technology Group at Concordia University, Montreal, and his colleagues carried out a meta-analysis of hundreds of studies in which distance education students were treated in different ways. They distinguished 3 types of interaction: student content, student-student, and student-teacher. They then analyzed all the studies to find which type of interaction made the greatest difference to student performance when it was increased. The results were very clear. Increasing student content interaction had much the greatest effect, with student-student interaction coming next and student-teacher interaction last. This highlights the importance of making quality OER or quality content available to our learners. So what implications does this have for pedagogy? Terry Anderson terms the student-content relationship with the focus on networks and collaboration as connectivism, which takes us beyond constructivism to connectivism. The emphasis is now on collaboration rather than competition, and the learner's role becomes more significant as she marks a shift from being a consumer to a producer of content. Let us now come to the 4th major trend emerging partially out of the use of free content, or OER. This is the massive open online courses, or MOOCs, a form of distance and online learning. Started at the University of Manitoba in 2008, MOOCs gained high visibility when adopted by the Ivy League institutions of the United States and have resulted in major consortia of the top universities on both sides of the Atlantic, Coursera, edX, and Udacity in the US, and FutureLearn, led by the Open University UK, and many others around the world. Sorry, I didn't change the slide. So, can MOOCs cut the cost of higher education? So far, MOOCs are free and do not offer qualifications or credits, but this is beginning to change. Georgia Tech is offering its prestigious Masters in Computer Science program as a MOOC because of which its existing cost of $40,000 is being reduced to $7,000, affordable even in many developing countries. One of the common objectives for adopting MOOCs in developing countries is to democratize access to higher education. The Malaysian Minister of Education has encouraged his institutions to leverage new technologies such as MOOCs to democratize access to higher education. The Indian government also wishes to use MOOC platforms to reach the unreached segments of society such as working class people and housewives. The National Project on Technology-Enabled Learning is a government-led initiative in India. It trains people in IT skills and is offered in collaboration with the industry. It is free, but those who need a certification after testing will have to pay about $40. MOOCs have so far been offered in higher education. My organization, CALL, in partnership with the IIT Kanpur, which is like PT UK, offered a MOOC on mobiles for development, covering technology as well as agriculture, mobile learning, inclusive finance, and banking. This interdisciplinary open course attracted over 2,200 students from 116 countries, 62% of whom were active participants. The 6-week course was completed by over 400 participants. So what did we learn? One, that it is important to provide high-quality materials combined with good teaching. The second, keeping the learners engaged is essential. And third, the IT platform must be reliable. So MOOCs mark yet another innovation in teaching and learning by putting greater responsibility on the learner to construct knowledge through peer-to-peer interactions and to move from teaching a small class to a massive dispersed group around the world. Another significant difference is the emergence in MOOC of the flipped classroom as the standard practice. There is a greater emphasis on peer-to-peer learning and to reading the materials before coming to the class, where the time is spent more for analysis and problem solving. The use of learning analytics, a component of the MOOC platform, can help us to collect and analyze data about how learning is taking place. Because of this, predictive systems can be developed to identify potential dropouts and provide the necessary support to help them overcome their difficulties. It can also highlight those areas where many students struggle so that tutors can get the feedback to take remedial measures. So we've looked at 4 present trends in distance and online learning. What are the emergent trends of the future? The recent Horizon report estimates that in the next 2 years, social media will become ubiquitous, and there will be a convergence of online and hybrid learning. Over the next 3 to 5 years, the availability of huge masses of learner data will make it possible to analyze how learning takes place for continuous improvement and better outcomes. Learners will also become creators of their own learning processes. So as we have seen, distance and online learning have grown and evolved over the last 50 years, keeping pace with and taking advantage of the various technologies. Distance and online learning has also opened up access to millions of learners and is a viable option for addressing issues of access, costs, equity, and quality. We have seen how distance and online learning have provided innovative means of delivering education. One major challenge that we referred to in the beginning is widespread unemployment. How can we make education relevant to the needs of our young people and the developmental needs of our societies? Today we see a greater emphasis on learning, not just for the sake of learning alone, but one that leads to social and economic development. So what kind of learning are we looking for in the 21st century? The international community had identified 8 Millennium Development Goals, which will come to a close next year. A new set of post-2015 development goals will be put in place by the global community. And if we review some of the sustainable development goals identified by the United Nations high-level panel, I've just listed 6 here, there are 17 of them, and these have been based on extensive consultations. We find that in addition to ending poverty by 2030, one key goal will be to create jobs. Look at the last line. Create jobs, sustain livelihoods, and equitable growth. Now let's look at UNESCO's post-2015 education agenda. This calls for equitable and quality lifelong learning for all by 2030. It's interesting to note that the emphasis is now shifting from education for all, which was primary education, to lifelong learning for all, which means learning across the spectrum, as Samar was saying this morning. In addition to providing quality education and lifelong learning, there is a skill on, look at the last dotty there, skills for life and work. So what is the Commonwealth saying? The Commonwealth Interministerial Working Group proposed access, quality, and equity as the 3 overarching goals of education. Here again, we can see, if you look at the middle line with quality, importance is being given to post-basic education for livelihoods and employment. So there's a whole lot of emphasis around the world now on skills, livelihoods, and employment opportunities for our young people. So today the world has changed and knowledge is multiplying at a rapid pace. Has the curriculum changed to keep pace with the requirements of the 21st century? Are we giving our youth the skills they need for employment and entrepreneurship? Research indicates that students could have 2 to 4 careers in a lifetime. They will need to continue to learn, unlearn, and relearn many different things during the course of their life. Does our curriculum prepare our students for making multiple career choices through relevant education? But first, what is relevant education? Walker did a research study in a secondary girls' school in South Africa, and she asked them that, what is it that you want to get from your education after school? And the girls said that we would like 3 capabilities. 1, they would like personal autonomy and independence of thought. 2, the ability to enter the world of work. And 3, an identity and a voice, which would get them respect and recognition from society. So what kind of skills are needed to succeed in the 21st century? The UNESCO Global Monitoring Report identifies 3 categories. Foundation skills dealing with literacy and numeracy, transferable skills relating to problem solving and the ability to adapt and use the knowledge and skills in various contexts, and technical and vocational skills associated with specific occupations. Now, what is it that employers want? As the Results for Development Institute's report points out, that employers are concerned about non-cognitive skills just as much as they are about cognitive and technical skills. These relate to communications, teamwork, leadership, entrepreneurship, etc. So what are we doing about incorporating the training relating to non-cognitive skills in our curriculum? 4 key strategies have been identified to get Europe's youth into work. 1 is to invest in innovations so that education becomes more affordable and accessible. 2, to bring together young people, employers, and education providers, something that we need to focus on. 3, build enabling structures through appropriate and enabling policy frameworks. And 4, share the practices that work. Context is always important, and what works in Europe may not be fit for purpose for us. so the models can be adapted to suit our own specific requirements. So to conclude, how can we address the challenge of skills development, gainful employment, and livelihoods? One, by transforming the curriculum to integrate cognitive and non-cognitive skills. Two, by harnessing appropriate technologies to address the learning needs of youth. The low-cost mobile devices is making this a real option in the developing world. And three, to ensure that there is a convergence between the needs of the labor market and that the education that we provide to our youth. And with that, let me thank you very much for your kind attention.